What's up, otakus? It's your tour guide here, coming to you on oddly enough, a Wednesday night. Um, I had I thought I was getting a package today in the mail. It had arrived at the Seattle, so I was tracking it on USPS, and a package from Roger had arrived in Seattle yesterday. I believe it was like yesterday, like afternoon. And usually when it arrives in Seattle, they process it, it's delivered the next day. Um, so we were expecting it today. But when I got up this morning, I checked, the package hadn't moved. So, it was going to probably be delayed a day. So Thursday, tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern, we're going to jump on live. I'm going to unbox. And what these books are, what the package is if you've been watching the channel, I sent Roger 5 books, 5 really sort of books with issues. And so they're, probably, I think they're all low grade books. There wasn't a book in there that you could say in its condition as is was a mid-grade book. They were all low grade books, but they had issues where we figured if we did some work on them and improved them, we could get them to one, present near like mid to high grade, and in certain cases maybe bump them up several grades. So that was the hope. We'll see how the results turned out, but we're going to again unbox that tomorrow live, and Roger's going to go over his process, his thoughts on the results, and we're going to just kind of, as best I can, I've done some testing with my camera. My camera has some issues, so hopefully there aren't lighting issues, but we're going to try to show the books off as best we can here, in my room or in my little station here. But we also have before-after photos that Roger took, so we'll show the photos as well, and kind of he'll talk through the process of the photos. And it should be a really, for me, it's really exciting. I just love doing these sessions. And we'll get more into it tomorrow, but at essence, what it is what I've seen in the hobby is people tend to, when they're on the hunt, they tend to focus on picking up something in high grade, maybe with a couple imperfections here and there that they feel they can press out, submit, and maybe potentially get a 9.8 or somewhere along those lines. And I think that's a fun way to approach the hobby. It's definitely, I'm not going to fault people for doing that, because it does require a good amount of attention to detail, knowledge of grading, and some luck when you submit it, right? If it comes back a 9.8, there's no better feeling than having put, but not all, not all collectors collect that way. And that's definitely not how I collect. For me, I do kind of have that same approach to picking up books. When I look at a book, I really think like, okay, if I work on this book, let's say cleaning and pressing, does it have potential for improvement? And so that's definitely factors in. Now, I don't do my own pressing or cleaning, so it really is just a matter of time. I do want to do it. It's just, I do kind of clean and try to get the books, looking as nice with the limited kind of tools that I have. And I don't mind kind of like, you know, adding some glue here to, repair maybe like ripped edges, torn edges, or just corners, getting flaps folded back and in a good position, and um, using some glue to keep to reinforce the position of a fold, for example. I do things like that, but for the most part, I just take a book that I find that I want in whatever as long as it's not really, it has to have a certain degree of eye appeal. I do, that's kind of like my base standard. But along, given that, there's, you can go from, good to near mint, depending on what you find. So I kind of just keep my mind very open. But what's great is when you pick up those low grade books, especially books that you like, you don't really, just having the book is more important than anything. And then when you get an opportunity to improve them, like you get them in a certain low grade or mid grade, and you get to improve it, and you see a market improvement, it just makes owning that book, so much, like it's kind of like, you'll care for your sick loved one, right? Like, so like I'll care for the sick loved one, but if you can see them make improvements in their health, um, it's that much more gratifying to you, right? And not to compare your loved ones to comic books, but that's kind of the same, um, evokes the same kind of sentiment, right? Like you see these books that you really like, yeah, they're in low grade, but you still love having them in your collection. But then when they come back, um, and you see a market improvement in their appearance and their condition and all that, it just like, it just makes you feel so good. And again, that's why I love you doing these sessions with Roger. I just feel like everything I've sent him up to this point, he's done like, he's like a surgeon. He's really, you know, operated and done magic to take a book and really repair it so that it's almost like you can't believe um, the degree to which the improvement is. So I'm excited to go through because I mean, I just gotta, I haven't looked at the books or anything, but just based on my conversations with Roger's very pleased with the results. So that just, um, gives me a lot of confidence in what we're going to reveal tomorrow. So very excited for that. Stay tuned for that. But the reason I wanted to hop on tonight, I was kind of bored, and I saw a great. First off, I want to give a shout out to Raph's Retro Comics. Um, I didn't. I'll try to link his channel in the description when I edit the video. But Raph is someone we had on the channel and featured him. He's fairly. I don't want to say he's new to collecting, but he's fairly new to the streaming. But he puts out some of the best content, and the reason he puts out some of the best content is because he's knowledgeable. He's very thoughtful with the topics he wants to broach, and he's thorough. I mean, he gives a really detailed sort of uh, history and uh, description of uh, the various content artists, things that were happening at the time, and also just think a big part of the industry or the comic book hobby is um, how a work is received by us as fans and by critics and the public as a whole. So, he does a good job kind of uh, giving a good overview on whatever topic he's covering. But he recently did a series of videos where he focuses on cover artists. So he focused on cover artists from the Bronze Age or the 70s, and then he did another series. Sorry, he focused on Marvel cover artists from the Bronze Age, and then he focused on Marvel cover artists from the 80s. And I really enjoyed both videos, and he had, I think, his list or his picks for his favorite cover artists, or who he thought were the, you know, uh, I guess, definitive cover artists for those time periods, was really a really nice uh, feature. And so I wanted to do something similar, except my list is a little different from his, and I'm only going to focus on 80s cover artists because I collected in the 80s, and so I have more. I feel like I know these artists very well, and I also feel more akin to their works since I, you know, uh, read and collected a lot of the books from this period. Um, but yeah, my list differs from Raf's in a lot of ways, and we'll get into kind of my rationale for the selection of artists that I picked, and the reasons I uh, selected these artists to be in my top five. So I'm just going to go over the top five artists. And I do want to point out, Raf does like a top 10 list and I think there's a lot of overlap for sure. It's just the sequence where we differ. For example, I definitely give props to Art Adams as a cover artist from this period. He did some great cover work. He was primarily a cover artist. He didn't do a lot of interior artwork, but he was featured on a lot of covers. And then Michael Golden's another great example. Michael Golden did a lot of covers, did a lot of interior work, and uh, very unmistakable style to his comic book art. And just, when you think of guys, it's just like, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, who epitomized the industry as just an artist who can kind of do it all. Definitely Golden is a big part of the conversation. John Romita Jr. definitely did a lot of cover work, did a lot of interior work as well. Definitely deserves um, an honorable mention. So, Bill Sienkiewicz, Bill Sienkiewicz is also uh, a great artist. And for me, it's you do see an evolution to his artwork, and he definitely comes into his own as an artist stylistically. That is very, I'd say, um, it epitomizes a modern style. He uses a lot of modern art techniques, and um, definitely kind of places himself in a class by himself. But while that's great, I do sometimes feel like that can distract from interior work, and so for me, it never really resonated that art style. And again, that's a style he developed. I don't want to say late, but it's definitely there's a transitional point where that style becomes what he's known for versus him kind of doing various different styles before he lands on that. So, but that's for any artist, and so I do feel like you have to have a certain amount of um, you have to accommodate uh, the earlier portion of an artist's work, right? It's like even Jim Lee, right? I love Jim Lee, but Jim Lee's some early stuff is pretty rough and raw, but he fairly quickly learns and adapts and comes into his own. And so I feel like that's the some artists take longer to come into their own. Some artists find that path rather quickly, um, but it's a similar path for a lot of artists. And then you have artists that are just like from day one, they they have the chops, and I call it the chops because cover art, doing great cover art doesn't mean you have the chops. Okay, and that's I think a problem with a lot of the people currently in the industry. Um, they do a lot of great cover work, but do they have the chops to do what a comic book artist is supposed to do, which is tell a story through panels and pictures, right? Um, so developing the chops is, I think, almost kind of separate from being a cover artist. Um, like Archer. Archer is a great cover artist. Even Peach Momoko, too, is a does great cover art. And the question was, wait, can she do panel work? And Peach Momoko's panel work is incredible. Um, but it is a very sort of um, there's not a lot of detail in her panels. They're very kind of manga. I don't want to say manga, but she does adopt a lot of the manga techniques to tell a story. So in that essence, she's being very efficient, but she's not adding a lot of detail that some of my favorite artists tend to do. So for me, my list is definitely you have to have the chops. To make the list, you have to have the chops and not just be pigeonholed into like being a cover artist. Uh, Cover art is a given, right? Like if you can tell a great story, cover art is just the first page of that story. So that's kind of where I land with my list, and all of these artists to a varying degree have the chops. So we'll go with, I think, number 5, and this is probably a controversial pick, but we're talking 80s, right? And people forget Frank Miller was quite prolific. He was doing so much work at Marvel. People kind of tend to forget that. He was working on the Avengers. He was working on Iron Fist, Power Man, Iron Fist. He was working on Daredevil, which is where I think he, along with his writing and his art, was just like pumping out by himself, essentially, a really compelling run on Daredevil. Probably the definitive run, because it's the character we're watching on Netflix right now is Miller's Daredevil, right? And he established the tone for that series in the 80s, which carries over to today. And this is just like one of my favorite covers by Frank Miller. It's the Black Widow web. Now, Frank Miller, and Raph covered this in his, because Frank was part of his list as well. Frank Miller is not the most talented artist by any means, but he can he tells a great story through panels, so he understands, um, you know, what is required, right? And he has a style that is unmistakable. So when you and also you cannot say his work is without detail, because he puts up an incredible amount of detail, shading, tone to tell you. It basically can read the scene just through the ink and the shading on his artwork. Um, and he tends to tell sort of more grim, gripping, kind of, dark. I don't want to say dark, but kind of more stories that are more serious in tone. Have a very sort of a riskier edge to the dramatic action. Right, there's a lot more tension um, in the scenes because they're oftentimes life or death. Um, it's building toward some kind of um, intense conflict, and so yeah, I mean, this is just a great example, right? That epitomizes sort of like the storytelling Frank does. Like, here's Daredevil, this very vulnerable position caught in Black Widow's web, and man, it's cover work like this, and he has just a slew of this kind of just quality work throughout the Daredevil run. Um, Obviously, he does incredible work that leads up to The Dark Knight Returns, which is for DC, but he has an incredible portfolio of covers over there at Marvel. So definitely he deserves to be on the list because he's one of those artists that have the chops, has developed a cult following for his work, and he also has just a prolific uh, volume of cover art and interior works for Marvel. So um, he's number 5 on the list. And this is another artist Raph had on his list, and I think maybe he might have had this artist kind of where I had him. I can't remember the exact position, but for me, uh, definitely Walt Simonson is one of the top, I think, artists working in the 80s at Marvel. And that's a pretty big statement, but a lot of that was because um, of his work on Thor. Thor was um, just when he came, he brought a style to Thor. Um, there was a new kind of just, tone in the characters and the scenarios that he brought to the title. Definitely raised the stakes on people's buy-in for the character. And yeah, I mean, look at this great cover here. You got the bearded Thor, which up to this point you didn't see it, right. But he introduced that visual. Now it's like, yeah, I mean, people just assume Thor has the beard, but that wasn't always the case. Thor was always sort of the clean cut, you know, um, Asgardian, and yeah, he definitely brought sort of a rougher, more realistic tone to the character, and you know, Simonson would go on to do a lot of different uh, cover and interior work, X Factor, um, just a bunch of covers on various titles throughout Marvel. And it was unmistakable when you see, Walt Simonson do something. He has just a signature style, much like Frank Miller. So, you know, also a guy with chops, right? He did a long run on Thor, um, and that was his. He didn't have to do a bunch of covers and stuff. His focus was like, I'm selling Thor. Like I'm doing the month to month, uh, and his run was very long. Probably uh, one of the more popular works that had a tremendous loyal following throughout the 80s. All right, my next artist is, if you could probably say there's an artist that uh, was a cover artist in the 80s, this was the guy. Um, Mike Zeck, first off, when you have, uh, when you have a basically a cross, what's the word I'm looking for? A publishing wide crossover with all the, characters and titles. And then you assign somebody, hey, we want you to do the cover and the interiors on this miniseries. I mean, this was the biggest event at the time at Marvel, and they gave the assignment to um, one of their top talents, and that is Mike Zeck. And Zeck does not disappoint on this cover. Now, you could make an argument that the interior work on the Secret Wars was not as kind of detailed, But again, I think that's part of uh, this industry. You got cover work. The artists are going to spend a lot of time, right? It's one panel. You get to kind of do a lot of kind of sort of detailed work because you've got a larger canvas to work with, and you can kind of take your time and make sure every aspect, every little detail, character detail that you're wanting to tell on the cover is there's more investment into that. Whereas if you're trying to tell a multi-page story, you're going to be kind of doing rougher type maybe sketches and kind of filling in and just getting the work out. And so but that's the role, that's the chops. So that's not a detriment because at the end of the day, you have to get the comic book out, right? And this is one of those mini series. They had to kind of just have everything ready so they could meet the deadlines and in a very short run. So all in all, I think again, Zeck has the chops, but I think Zeck, where his strengths lie, is definitely more toward the cover than toward the interior work. Um, and that's just, I think, if you look at his body of work, he's always been sort of the cover guy, on most of the where you see him. He's if you've got it like, hey, we've got a hole, we got to sell this book. Let's put Zeck on it, and Zeck will do the cover artwork. Um, but in terms of the interior work, Marvel was in a place where all their major titles had a devoted artist and inker, right? Sometimes they were the same guy, but they had a devoted team that worked on it and did everything, cover to interiors. And so that was kind of the framework that. Now there were different titles that didn't have that. You know, there were titles that struggled with, like they would juggle, like who can work on this book, who has the bandwidth to work on this book, and it just felt like you just had like this revolving kind of door of people at Marvel that were coming in and doing things. Um, but for the major titles, you know, we're talking like Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Thor, these like mainstays. Those definitely had those teams, and those teams were synonymous with the book. So, you know, if you were getting your X-Men, you knew that that artist was going to be there um, to greet you on the cover and in the interior. So it's no surprise. And that leads us to number 2 on my list. Now, Mark Silvestri literally got his start in the 80s, right? In the early 80s. And he did some like horror work on some horror titles at DC. But then he came over to Marvel in, I think, 82, and he started on King Conan, or Conan the King, the Savage King, or something like that. And he did, you know, he did a series of covers and interior work, and then eventually took over King Conan. I think it's called King Conan or Conan the King, where he was doing the entire book. Now, it wasn't one of the main Conan titles. It was kind of like an offshoot Conan title. But Silvestri did some amazing work and really developed his style working on Conan. And then he did some cover, you know, he was kind of establishing himself as a talent at Marvel. So he got some cover work, he got some interior work here and there, you know, the Spider-Man, X Factor. But he landed the starting gig at Marvel's flagship title, Uncanny X-Men. And it is some of the best work of the 80s. You know, it's, first off, it's the flagship title. So it's just the focus on his work with Chris Claremont on just creating some of these very memorable characters, you know, like Mr. Sinister, Jubilee, that's all under Silvestri's watch. He dealt with sort of team transitions during his run. So you had, you know, people coming and going. You had Dazzler and Longshot join the team. You had just kind of a bevy of characters that were kind of really building sort of a rapport. And, you know, like Psylocke joins the team as well around this time. So he's, there's definitely a lot of buy-in from fans on what's happening in the story. It's a transitory stage for the Uncanny X-Men during this period. But what keeps people coming back is the incredible interior work of Mark Silvestri. You talk about dynamic. I mean, Wrath had, I think, Todd McFarlane number 2 on this list. And a lot of great reasons for Todd, because I think Todd essentially is a cover artist. He can do interiors. He's got the chops to do interiors. But much like Zek, I think interiors are not Todd's strength. Now, I think Todd does interiors, but he does it in a way that kind of cheats. You know, it's like he uses a lot of kind of like the cues for motion, a lot of like kind of graphic sound effects, or just backgrounds, with lots of like things that really don't tell the story. It's just a lot of background work and like the characters central to it. Um, it's just for sort of very basic kind of panel work. They're just like a series of, we could almost say like very loosely sketched covers piecing together the book, um, rather than thoughtful sort of transitions within the panels. Um, and so I think, again, he's a great cover artist, but I think when I was young, I loved Tom McFarlane. I just loved his work on the Spider-Man. But I go back and look at his work on Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man now, and I just like, it doesn't scream like he's one of the top um, comic book artists, given the wealth of incredible talent we've had throughout the history of this hobby or this industry. He doesn't strike me as one of those like top guys. Now, he's a fan favorite. He's a great cover artist. He has some of the most iconic covers from this period, hands down. But when you really say like, does he have the chops? He just barely kind of I think in terms of the chops, he barely kind of meets that baseline. Now, does he improve? Yes, he improves. In his Spawn run, he improves. But I think ultimately it's something he had to work very hard to put the work out. And he got to a point where like, I don't need to do it. I'm going to put better people on the Spawn title, kind of take a step back. And he ended up just like sometimes doing covers and letting Greg Capullo kind of take over the run. And Greg Capullo, kind of mimicked Todd's style initially, and then eventually kind of made Spawn his own character. But there's definitely a lot of Todd influence in Capullo's early work that resonates to today. I think Capullo definitely is a standalone great artist, but yeah, he had to kind of like use a lot of the techniques Todd did and kind of matched a lot of the same techniques as an artist. But back to Silvestri, I mean, this is just an iconic cover. But really what makes Silvestri special is, again, his run on X-Men. And then he does a fantastic run on Wolverine. And then he goes to, Image through Top Cop Studios, creates just a bevy of fantastic characters. In fact, if you talk about like probably some of the most compelling like Image, ongoing Image titles, I would say, like Cyberforce is just up there in terms of like a team that had a lot of buy-in, incredible artwork by Silvestri. And then you have characters like Cyblade, also very popular. So yeah, kudos. Think we look back on Silvestri's career, and we can definitely say he's one of the top artists to come out of Marvel. But he had a very healthy body of work at Marvel that cements his legacy. And again, he was kind of isolated to Uncanny X-Men in terms of when he came into his own. But man, there's so much there to choose from on his Uncanny X-Men run. A lot of great cover artwork, but he also did a lot of great cover artwork on different titles. And so he gets my pick, just also one of my all-time favorite artists. Um, the guy I chose for number one, and it's kind of unfair because he definitely got his start in the 70s, this artist. And he came into his own right at the end, the latter part of the 70s, early 80s on his run in Uncanny X-Men, and that he just became sort of the gold standard for, well, let's say he just revolutionized comic books. It wasn't just him, it was that entire team, Terry Austin, uh, John Byrne, Chris Claremont. But what they produced, um, again, it just sort of, he took over for Dave Cockrum, but what Cockrum and Byrne and that Claremont team produced, um, with the new team, is just some of the best comic book stories, uh, probably unmatched. Just the tone and the pace of each story. You had maybe a two or generally the story arcs didn't run past 2 issues, so you had like a 2-issue story within a larger story arc, right? It was building toward the eventual, you death of a character. So um, it's just, again, some of the best work. And you're kind of handed the keys to the kingdom with that, and it's like, how do you follow it up? And they put Byrne right to work on Fantastic Four, and he does a really, really long run on Fantastic Four. But again, the magic continues, because they give him a lot of the creative license on this Fantastic Four. He's writing, he's doing pencils. Um, he is still working with Terry Austin on this run. I don't know if he works exclusively. I think he has a series of inkers that transition in and out. But yeah, he's definitely the star of this entire run. He's writing. He's um, pretty much putting the book out on his own. And man, look at this cover here. That is, I mean, is there a better Galactus cover than this? I doubt that you'd be able to find one other than some of the iconic ones from Kirby. This is just classic 80s cover right there. And man, Byrne, you talk about chops, you talk about prolific career at Marvel. I mean, he did Uncanny X-Men, he did, well, first of all, he did Avengers, he did Captain America, he did Uncanny X-Men, he did Fantastic Four, he did Submariner, he did Alpha Flight. I mean, he just touched he had his hand in every cover, character, you name it. And he did it. So I think in terms of volume, you can't touch Byrne's footprint. In terms of talent, come on, writing. As a writer, and an artist, when you can do both, because it oftentimes takes a bit of collaboration, an artistic license, so you understand the story, but you take the dialogue per se, and you work that in to build the panel work, right? And this is where I think when you have guys like McFarlane and Zach, who kind of just are going through the motions, just trying to get the work out, right? Um, where they struggle, like sometimes you just look at a panel and it's just like it's not making sense with the dialogue and the story that's going on. Sure, there's a lot of great action, but it's there's kind of a disconnect there. But on Burns' work, everything is so intentional, right? Like each scene, there's not a lot maybe happening in the panels, but um, there's a lot of like detail, quality panel work there because it's a static scene, right? So I think that's where where you know you get a sort of separation from people with chops versus people going through the motions. And so no one can burn is, I think, epitomizes um, how when you work hard and you uh, see yourself becoming a star in the industry, burn is that sort of gold standard. Like, you want to be a star, you got to put out and be as talented as this guy. And you hear interviews by Jim Lee. Jim came to Marvel in what, the late '80s, so he had this sort of like mentor role model there. Like, I want to be like that guy, the guy who just left Marvel. I want to be like that guy and produce the kind of works and have the talent that John Byrne had. And Jim Lee is not shy in pointing out that John Byrne was one of his major influences and a person who tried to like emulate his career after. Now I think Jim Lee's reached a point where now I think he's maybe surpassed Byrne to a certain degree. But there was a time, again, at this era where definitely John Byrne was the 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 ace, the number one ranked. If you're doing rankings, I don't believe in these kind of things, but if you're doing like a head-to-head tennis tournament style matchup, John Byrne is like his Grand Slam title holder in comic books. So there you go. There's my list, top 5. Now, this is a very subjective list. Everybody's going to have a different list and have different reasons. And I don't have Todd McFarlane on my list, but if you do have Todd McFarlane on your list, it's fine. We just agree to disagree on, I think, why Todd deserves or doesn't deserve to be on a list like this. But I outlined my reasons. I just think if you go back and look at Todd's work, even on ASM, even on Spider-Man, it does improve. I'm not saying there's not improvement, but when you compare it to his contemporaries, what his contemporaries are doing, I think there's a lot of things that lack. Yes, they're kind of fun to look at. There's a lot of like motion and kind of things going on in the panels, action-wise, but uh, the quality of his work is not quite there. I think today's Todd is very different. I think when you look at it, he's developed and come into his own style now, and he knows his strengths and weaknesses, so he tends to focus on what he's good at. And I haven't really read a Todd McFarlane interior comic book in quite some time, so I wouldn't mind seeing how that's his talent has evolved. But in terms of his cover work, I think he's unmatched. Again, he's probably, you're just talking cover artists. he is kind of in a league of his own because of all the iconic uh, work that he's put out over the years. And that's really where I think fans just really, his fans especially, just really uh, have something to latch on to. Like, he's done some really incredible, um, and he has the Todd style uh, that makes his characters just so um, unique and signature. So, yes, you know, I think this period is full of great talents. So, hopefully, if anything, this list will get you to see maybe some of these artists in a different light, or at least take another look at the incredible work um, Marvel artists are doing at this time. Now, I'm going to follow this list up very soon with my top 80s DC artists, and that I'm going to have a lot of fun with because while a lot of the focus is with Marvel during this period, because Marvel was outselling DC, and a lot of that outselling had to do with um, the efforts of like a John Byrne, the efforts of like a Todd McFarlane, Mark Silvestri, just the talent in Marvel, including what would be in the '90s, the '90s X-Men, Jim Lee's contributions, um, but DC uh, definitely was kind of like lagging behind that. But I think in terms of talent, uh, DC was no joke. And I think um, if you were to put, if you were to just put these artists out there and you were to have a pickup game, um, I think you can't sleep on what was going on at DC. And so we'll cover my top 80s DC artists in an upcoming video, and hopefully you'll check that out. So I just want to thank people here. I did largely ignore the chat because I was just so focused. So let's see here. Hey, what's up, fanboy? I want to see you back on Saturdays, man. I've been jonesing for some morning content. So hopefully this week we'll see you back on. Hey, Roy, what's up? Okay, I'm assuming it's one of the ones I showed off. Silvestri, so What Works was Wills Portacio, and I think he might have done some works on like some covers, maybe some interiors. I know they all kind of like helped each other out on other people's titles and whatnot. But yeah, What Works was largely Wills Portacio. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, the '90s were. Um, I like to, when I talk about image, I like to. So what I mean chops, right? We're talking about chops. Um, you had artists that had the chops coming from Marvel, but it was limited chops, meaning, like I just told you, like here's a guy who could do the story and seamlessly tell that story because he had it all in his head, right? He's like, I know what's going to happen here and here and here. Here's the story. I'm going to make this panel to match that dialogue. And when you have that one person in charge of it, it's seamless. It's like it's really just so easy to jump in and I think that's a big part of why Thor had the success, right? He Simonson worked very closely with his partner to work on those stories together. But when you take your chops and you start a company and you work with a lot of writers who are kind of doing it for the first, and I'm specifically talking about like um, a lot of the stuff that came out of um, the Wildstorm Studios. They didn't have a lot of like quality. I'm not taking anything away from Brandon Choi, but I felt like Brandon Choi was a rookie to comic book writing, and it really showed. And even though he had the great talents of Jim Lee, you could only go so far if you don't have the experience, right? And that was largely what failed that series of works. Um, but even like Liefeld, Silvestri, all these guys, they didn't have the writing chops. And even Spawn, I mean, I think Spawn is a great series overall, and I think it's a really compelling story, but it's not, um, again, the writing is great. I don't want to say it's bad. It's great. Spawn is great from first page uh, through the meat of the run. Right. It's great, but it was a situation where I think Todd kind of got lucky. He kind of like um, struck lightning in a barrel. Um, and I think when you go just bring over artistic talent without bringing in the editorial and the writing talent to match, you just had a lot of like fluff, like covers, kind of really compelling initial like comic books, like to start it off, but didn't have the substance to carry through. And so that is where I think having a good balance in your production team, like people who understand what a story arc is, how to develop characters, how to put them in situations that really have buy-in. Those are some of the more challenging things for a comic book run or even an issue, right? Just to get an buy-in on an issue, but let alone, you know, 5 to 6 consecutive issues. I just feel like you just didn't get that, or you got it, but it was kind of like just a bunch of like fans, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you did this? This is the way I'm imagining these image um, production meetings. You're just kind of like, what if we introduced a guy with like 5 arms and he has a shady war past or something, like that's the the level of complexity they do bring to a character. It's just this sort of loosely thought out, loosely built on a character design, right? They design the character first and then they tell this backstory, where it really should be like kind of independent, right? You build a character, uh, put them in a certain scenario, build the backstory around them, and then you introduce it to the artist, and the artist does the design from those kinds of, and then that's the sequence. But it just felt like everything was being done in a hurried pace, not well thought out, and to be honest, it translated that way. All right, well, thanks for joining, guys. Sorry I ignored you. I didn't mean to ignore you. I just was like focused on kind of showing off these things. But thanks for joining. I will be on again. I'm going to do a DC cover artist. And Raph, if you're watching, let me know what you think of my list. I know I said I'd respond on your thing. This is my response. So hopefully, I'm curious to get your thoughts on my picks, but hope you got a kick out of it. And yeah, I'm going to be doing my DC list, so hopefully that inspires you to put out a DC list of your own. So yes, thanks for joining, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Join us tomorrow. We're going to open up Roger's package, go over his results from his work on my comic books, and yeah, that should be a fun time. So we'll see you here tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. See you then.